Hi there, good evening to you all. Eimear Burke here. Welcome to another Fireside Chat brought to you by the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. And this is where I'm in conversation with, I'd say, an ordinary member of the Order, but none of them so far have been ordinary. They're quite extraordinary, but somebody who's not very well known. So just type in your names and let me know where you're from. I see Keith is first here from a glorious spring lunchtime in Vancouver. Hi, Keith. So just type in your name just to let me know that you're there. I can see there are people there, but no comments so far. Hi, Stephanie from Utah. Lovely to see you, Linda Joan. Well done. You made it again from Norfolk Island. That's wonderful. Hi, Sherry. Sherry Wittering. That's lovely. And hi, John from Slough. That's wonderful. Hi, Jackie from Scotland. Helen from Sussex. Hi, Linda. Wonderful to see you. And Stefan Macabre from Ireland. Where in Ireland are you from, Stefan? It'd be interesting to see that. Anastasia, Valentina from Glastonbury. How good to see you again. And from Stockport, Montreal, Arkansas. Wonderful. And Atlanta. Lovely. And Bognor Regis. Wonderful. And Holland. Lovely to see you all. Mexico, wonderful. Anyway, you're all very, very welcome. And so just let me introduce you to my guest this evening is David Bramwell. David, it's just so lovely to have you on this this chat.
Thank you. I'm looking at where everybody is from, and it's extraordinary. I've never been in a situation like this before, where we're having a conversation and there are people literally from all over the world tuning in. That's great. I wanted to say your little thing at the beginning. Are you going to change it when it gets to a baking hot summer's day? I'm hoping you're going to do poolside chat. Right? Otherwise, we'll all be sitting here kind of wiping our foreheads, watching that fire and hearing the harp and thinking that, Christmas is around the corner or something.
I have a little courtyard outside that's a nice place that I can do it. And I have got my Ethernet cable that's long enough for it to come down the stairs and plug in. So when I'm hearing an echo, sometimes it happens and sometimes it goes. So, yes. And I mean, a
little inflatable paddling pool that you can dip your toes in. I
exactly.
want to see that.
In your dreams. I do have a hot tub in the garden, just too far away for an Ethernet cable, but it's interesting. I would love to be able to have them outside, like a lakeside chat, but it'll all depend on internet and all of that stuff, because I think this uses quite a bit of cyber power. Anyway, it's just so lovely. And we've got Marianne from the Orkney Islands and Sharon from New Zealand and Jamie Morgan from the US. So it's just wonderful to see you all. I mean, people come, we've had people from Africa, from Asia, from New Zealand, Australia, America, South America, Europe, Ireland, England, Scotland, Wales. So we have got quite a following. So it's just lovely to be all here together. And I know people would be really, really interested to hear you. And I remember the first time, and somebody from Norway I see. Hi, Anne. That's wonderful. And Tara from New York. Welcome back. So the first time we met was in... what do you call it? That lovely Covenstead B&B guest house in Glastonbury. Yeah. At our last physical gathering of the Order, that was December 2019.
That's right.
And I remember, go on.
Yeah, no, it feels a lifetime ago now. Not because just of the time that's passed, but also what's happened since then, and the fact that the idea of such a gathering feels quite alien now. Thinking of all of those people and all the experiences we had together intimately in close spaces. Yeah,
that's right. 200 of us, and I remember we walked together to the Chalice Well ceremony. Do you remember?
I do. Yeah.
At 7:30 in the morning. But what was really interesting was the afternoon, because you gave a magnificent presentation on your book, The Cult of Water. And you made history, I think, because you got a standing ovation. And it was I was blown away by it. Do you want to talk a little bit about it? Because I ask about people's landscape, and I know This is around the River Don and Doncaster and where you're from. So would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Okay, I don't know where to dive in, although that's an appropriate metaphor to start with. Well, because there's so many people from around the world, I should say the River Don. There are several River Dons in Europe, and this River Don flows through Doncaster and Sheffield in Yorkshire in the north of England, and the River Don. Thank you.
Somebody wants a link to the book. We will put it in the chat at some point. Yeah, go on.
The River Don, the Romans came and they built a town called Danum on the banks of the River Don, and they took their name from Danu, the water goddess, who the Don was named from, and gave her name to the Danube and the Don, and I think there's a Don in Russia and others. And I grew up in Doncaster, an industrial coal mining town in the late 70s and early 80s that was going through a very poor time. We had miner strikes, very poor area then, very poor area now. The river badly or heavily industrialized, heavily polluted, declared biologically dead at the turn of the 20th century, canalized, culverted, manipulated, and made it inaccessible. We forget that one of the consequences of industrialization on our rivers was to make our rivers inaccessible when they used to be places of reverence. And I realized that I grew up in a town in which I had no relationship whatsoever with the river. I barely knew of its existence. It had actually been physically moved out of the town centre because I think it got in the way of the shopping centre they were building.
Wow.
And so I wanted to reconnect with this river. I wanted to face my thalassophobia. I have a profound fear of deep water, dark water, being isolated in water. And yet I find myself forever being drawn to water. I live in Brighton in the south of England by the sea. I go swimming in the sea, but I'm a timid swimmer and I need somebody with me. And when I see a dark shape underneath, I panic and I return to the shore, even though I know usually it's rocks or seaweed. And I have well in my name, so I'm David Bramwell. So my name is associated with Bram's Well, we guess, which would have been a location. Next to my house is a reservoir, an underground reservoir, and at the bottom of my street is the remains of the public bathing houses in this area. So I'm surrounded by water, and I wanted to research the stories around Danu and the folklore of the River Don. I wanted to walk the River Don back to its source, as much of the River Don as I could, and with that, I also wanted to tell a story that would weave fact and fiction, which is the cult of water is a weaving. It's very clear that fact and fiction is interwoven. But also I wanted to explore a family mystery that happened in 1976. And this is a true story that in 1976, we had a drought in the UK, which was unusual at the time. You remember? And we had a plague of aphids, which led to a plague of ladybirds. I was 8 at the time, and everyone who remembers the summer of 1976 should or would remember that you were just knocking ladybirds out of your hair, out of your clothes. There were just millions of them everywhere. And then when the aphids went, the ladybirds all starved to death. And so you had ladybird carcasses, or whatever the word would be, sort of littering the streets. And it was weird. It was biblical. And we used to drive to Sheffield and outside of Sheffield, a place called Derbyshire, lovely for walking, where there's a reservoir called Ladybower Reservoir, which was created it was built in 1939. A village was in the valley, and either out of superstition or respect, they kept the church, destroyed all the other houses, and when the water levels fell sufficiently low, the church reappeared through the water. And we went there in the summer of 1976 to see the church spire poking through the water. You don't forget something like that at the age of 8. I remember it would have been 35 degrees. It was unbearably hot. I remember walking the perimeter, or some of the perimeter of the reservoir, and seeing that church spire poking through the water. And then a few years ago, I was doing some research into this, and I discovered the church had been destroyed in 1948. And we did not see the church spire because it wasn't there. And yet not just myself and my family having this shared hallucination or whatever you want to call it, but actually, whenever I talk about it, the times that I've given the performance of the Cult of Water, there's always someone that comes up and says, I saw it too. And in fact, even the Yorkshire Post newspaper recently reported stories about the church appearing in 1976. So it was about exploring that mystery as well. Mysteries of water, folklore of water, and to reacquaint myself with the idea of the goddess association, the water nymphs, the rituals connected with water, because the echoes of them are still there through dropping the coin in the well for good luck. But my God, the Romans, when they came here, they'd need to chuck half their cutlery and their swords and shields and coins into the water before feeling that they had appeased the goddess and could pass over the rivers. So there was lots to research, and one of the things that I discovered that was a bit of a gift when you're looking for a story was that Sheffield and Doncaster are about half an hour's drive away from each other. And Sheffield, I'm saying this for those who don't know, Sheffield's one of our biggest cities and was a steel industry focus point for Europe, pretty much. The biggest steel works in Europe was a quarter of a mile in length. And I discovered that they adopted Vulcan, the Roman god of fire and forge, as their mascot, and stuck him at the top of the tallest building in Sheffield, which at the time was the town hall. And so he was sort of symbolically responsible for the polluting of the river. I saw it as this battle of the sexes, kind of god of fire, goddess of water, and him sort of standing towering above. And how interesting it was that for a long time during the Industrial Revolution and into the 20th century, you could say that it was very clear who had the upper hand and who had the power. But as we see things changing, hopefully for the better, in society, we're seeing that power diminishing and our rivers being cleaned up, our waterways being made accessible again, a greater sense of reverence for many towards the river. And so so it was this kind of reconnection with Danu, and there's some playful stuff in it as well. I don't know. Many of you hopefully will know the pop star Jarvis Cocker. He grew up in Sheffield in a place called Wicker, and he wrote a song called Wicker Man, in which he tells the story of, in 1979, I think it was, he just got a rubber ring, and him and a friend jumped into the Don, which would have been really unpleasant. The water would have been incredibly polluted still back in the late 70s, and they just jumped in the river to see where it would take them. And they ended up all the way in a town called Rotherham, just on the outskirts of Sheffield. So I mentioned, any little stories I could find around the river, I've included. Sean's asking about my druid-related eye injury. Thank you.
Yes. Was that
that was
the catalyst?
It was. That was nearly a month ago now, wasn't it? Yes, that was me trying to honor the equinox and going out to do a bit of gardening and having my COVID jab on the same day, and I managed to jab myself in the eye with a very spiky plant, and I was in a considerable amount of pain for several days. So I was jabbed twice and realized that actually being a trainee druid is not to be taken lightly, because there can be physical pain involved if you're not careful.
Oh, wonderful. So, and hopefully, during this time that you can read something from the Cult of Water.
Oh, crikey. Okay. I haven't planned that, but I can do that. Yeah.
We agreed that yesterday. Have you forgotten?
Yeah.
Don't worry. Just only to embarrass you. So, what brought you to OBOD then? What brought you? Because I know you've obviously been on various pathways before joining the order, but what brought you to join the order? Because when you spoke at the gathering, I don't think you had become a member at that point.
No, not at all. No, I decided at the end of that weekend, because I had such fun. I found the group to be so inclusive, so down to earth, so warm and welcoming. The creativity that I experienced that weekend on the Saturday night was extraordinary. It was there was a kind of coming home feel to it, and I had and also, you know, kind of synchronicity as well, or serendipity, because whilst writing and researching and experiencing the elements of the cult of water, I realized that afterwards what I wanted to do was I wanted to honor the element of water. I thought maybe I want to worship. I'd like to worship water, and I realized with the audience we have to. I was about to say, you know, it's not as daft as it sounds, but I don't need to worry about the audience tonight thinking that's not as daft as it sounds. But I remember what Alan Moore, the comic book author, collaborated with this, and he very kindly gave up some of his time to answer questions about symbolism of water in relation to occultism and paganism, and I recorded that and used elements of that recording for the live performance, and also for an album version as well, which came out at the same time. And I remember reading that hearing that when he was 40, he declared himself to be a practicing magician, and that his icon was a lesser known Roman deity called Glykon, who was also a glove puppet. And Alan Moore said, you know, the reason for choosing Glykon as a symbol that connected him with magic was that he was never gonna, as they say, you know, mistake the finger pointing at the moon for the moon. He was never going to get confused that a minor deity / glove puppet was actually, you know, where it was all at. It was clearly there, as, you know, as a motif for him. And I thought, well, I'm not going to get confused if I try and bring an element of magic and ritual into my life with water, because it's such a it's a shapeless, you know, kind of mysterious element, isn't it? But then it was coming across OBOD and starting to do some reading into it that I thought, well, this is extraordinary, because, you know, why not, for a start, honor all the elements? And there was so much there already that was piecing things together in my mind in terms of not just doing this in isolation, but joining an order, and all of the other elements of that would inspire me to do things that I wouldn't normally do, in terms of connecting more and more with ecology and environmentalism. And even some of the very practical things that I've been reading about within the the first year for the bardic tradition. Just, you know, saying you know, we're focusing on earth. Have you thought about spending more time in the kitchen? And I need to spend more time in the kitchen. I need to spend more time in the garden, because I recognized through doing these exercises and the reading and thinking and rituals that I'm all air and fire, and, you know, earth, and I need grain, and I need water.
You're breaking
so
up.
It all made sense, and I'd been part of a group. Oh,
you're breaking up a little bit.
How is it now? Is it still?
I know. No, you're okay now.
Well, okay. If it gets bad, I'll go downstairs and I'll light a fire and I'll sit by the fire.
So you said you belong to another group.
Many years ago, I was part of a group called the Revolutionary Gnostic Shamans of the Light. I mean, this is a long time ago. This would be 20 years ago, and I joined them because I live in Brighton. There's, you know, you can find a local cult quite easily. So I joined this group for a few years, and we studied Gurdjieff, and we studied Tantra, and we studied the Kabbalah, and we drank ayahuasca, which was quite an unknown psychedelic in the West at the time, and I had a lot of fun with it, and I learned a lot from it. But I came to realize that I am the kind of person that will be drawn to the complexities of some of these systems, and too much enamored with overly complicated rituals and overly complicated ideas, and you know, having tried to read Crowley in my late teens and getting bogged down with that, trying to read Gurdjieff is difficult. And I think Alan Watts being one of those people, the 60s philosopher, that kind of made me realize, listening to his stuff, thinking, oh, this can be accessible and it can be fun. and it can be done with humor and a lightness of touch. And I kind of started to disconnect from this group, and also compassion didn't feel like to be the thing that was at the heart of the teachings and the individuals running it, and that I struggled with as well. So OBOD, it's been great joining.
I'm glad that you. I think there's plenty of compassion in OBOD. Yeah, I think yes. Well, I'm not biased, of course. You've come to the right place, though, David. Now, there's a question here from Stephanie Kelly. Sepish. How about herbs and native shrubs? Most native plants to your area landscape seem to make the biggest impact and are sure to thrive. Okay. Are you have a garden? Are you a gardener?
Oh, I have a very small garden at the back. I've never, I haven't engaged sufficiently with gardening. I don't know. Are you one of these people in which there are certain things that you do because you feel driven to do them, and there are things that you want to do and you're half driven to do them, but you need someone to hold your hand? And
I get both of those. I remember the first.
Sorry.
As my experience of gardening as a child was having to weed. So my mother did all the nice things, and I absolutely hated weeding. So I thought, when I grow up, I am never going to have a garden. So my first husband and I bought a 2-up, 2-down townhouse, and in the show house there was a tiny little flower bed. You know, it's probably 6 inches deep and about 2 feet in length outside the front window. And I thought, we're in the right place. Except the we bought had what I thought were these football fields. I mean, they were urban flower beds. And I thought, oh my God, I have to go and do something with this. So for the first time, I didn't let weeds grow. And then I thought, I just can't have it looking like this. So my next door neighbor, she started to help me. And this was the hand-holding piece.
Yeah.
Give me plants and say, I can give you a cutting from this, or I can give you a slip from that. And then I actually got to really, really enjoy it. My husband didn't. He would just carry buckets of water for me. He liked watching me in the garden. Then when I decided to move house, I said, I want a house with a bigger garden. So by that point, I was hooked. And now I live in a huge garden that was originally a field and now is full. So it was like I needed that initial hand holding and then I discovered the joy in weeding. That actually, when I'm weeding, I get rid of loads of crap. It's not just the weeds in the garden. Forgive weeds, all weeds are wonderful plants that are just growing in the wrong place. But that notion of weeding, clearing out, and it can be an actual, a meditation. And I feel much, much better after having weeded. So I actually enjoy weeding.
I don't have any problems with. There's not very much to weed because there's not a lot of space. I have, because of having the reservoir, a closed reservoir opposite, the water board have a small area of green outside. So I'm lucky because Brighton, the area I live in, it's all terraced houses, and the gardens are the size of a shoebox. So I'm lucky to have a green space outside. So yes, I'm lucky to be able to have trees and birds and foxes, and in the past badgers wandering up and down the street. But not a lot of space that I can cultivate. So I can keep that as an excuse. I can't have any excuse for why I don't do enough cooking. But yeah, I need a bit of hand holding with that.
Or a whip. So somebody says, David, I so enjoyed listening to your Cult of Water project. Welcome to OBOD. That's from Brenda Ash.
Thank you, Brenda.
So that's really sweet. So can you remember your first spiritual experience? Or one that, I suppose.
You know what? I can share with you. I can share with you something that I have only ever spoken with, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 people.
Okay.
In my life, okay, and it's partly because it's very hard to put into words, as I guess such experiences are. When I was very small, when I used to get ill, and sometimes when I was having sort of half waking dreams, I would I felt like I was in some kind of battle is the wrong word. That I was in a place in which two almighty forces were coming together and coming apart again. I wouldn't have thought like this as a child. I wouldn't have used these metaphors. But that's, I mean, but actually you don't think about it as a kid. You just experience it.
Yeah.
And it was and I was inside it, I was inside it. And it was overwhelming and terrifying and exhilarating. And when these two forces came together, there was creation, destruction, whatever, and then they'd pull apart again, and there'd be this calm, and then it was a pulse. It was this slow pulse, and it was only when I was in my early 20s that I read a book by Brian Bates, who wrote The Wisdom of the Weird and The Way of the Weird, and he wrote that there was a myth, there was an ancient myth in this land, supposedly, that or maybe it was a Viking or a Danish, I don't know, that the universe came to existence when the god of fire and the god of ice had a battle in the heavens. And for some reason, it was only at that point that I suddenly made this connection with, God, that resonates with that feeling that I had as a kid, that I was kind of experiencing or part of, or what, this battle, this coming together of these two opposing or maybe interdependent forces. I don't know. And then I went to a theosophy weekend in which myself and my partner were probably 30 at the time, and apart from us, the youngest person in the room was about 108. This was, theosophy was clearly kind of not the force it once was 100 years previously. And there was a guy who got up and he said something similar-ish, used different metaphors, but talked about when he was very, very young, having this overwhelming feeling, and that he attributed it as being, kind of experiencing the birth of the universe, or experiencing the forces of the universe, or I don't know. And there are a couple of other people in the room sort of were, yeah. So that's the earliest memory I could have of something that you would call mystical. And I still struggle with the metaphors for that. But yeah, that. But I think otherwise, growing up in Doncaster, from a family who live very straightforward, simple lifestyles with interests in, kind of golf, walking, television. That's about it. Grew up in a house with no books, no records, no art really. Actively discouraged from buying records and books. So it wasn't until I left home at 18 and discovered a secondhand bookshop in Coventry, where I went to university. And there was a shelf with a subject called psychology, and another one, magic and mysticism or something. I didn't know what these words meant because I'd not been introduced to them. But for some reason, I picked a book off the shelf that was about Wilhelm Reich, another about Aleister Crowley, another about Carl Jung. I met a friend at university who'd been to a Steiner school. That sounded fascinating. So I think, it was in me. That search, that, calling yourself a seeker or whatever, has always been there. But it wasn't really opened up until I left Doncaster.
What did you study? What did you read in college in Coventry?
Oh God. well, I went to a very straight comprehensive school in Donny. The most exotic subject on offer was economics. For A level, that is, and I only say exotic because we hadn't done it for O levels, so it's like, oh, what is that? I was pushed into doing the sciences, and I'd always been into music as a kid, as you can see from the stuff in the background, but music O level didn't interest me. It was all classical music, and the music teachers were so tedious. So I sort of was pushed into science. You're a bloke, do science. And I ended up doing, I got atrocious A-level results because of no great affinity or natural aptitude with science. And so I went through clearing, and I got offered the only course which was called Combined Science. Even the title was dull, at Coventry Polytechnic, and failed the first year. Sat it again, failed half of it. The ones that I didn't fail were maths and geography, and so I went on to do a degree that was combined maths and geography. My dad was a maths teacher, so maths is kind of in the blood. And geography, could be, all subjects are fascinating if taught in the right way, but as we know, university teaching can often just beat any love you might have out of you. So I've not applied that knowledge since I left. That was not my calling. But university, I'm like many people, it offered the opportunity to meet others and to get engaged with groups and ideas and philosophies and bands. And so what I did was, when I finished, I decided that I wanted to educate myself, because I didn't feel like I'd had any kind of education. And because the only books I read were stolen from the school book cupboard, books that were no longer on the syllabus, and I would go and I'd take home a copy of Lord of the Flies or Catch-22 because they looked interesting, and they were interesting. That was the most subversive literature I could get was from school. But then when I finished, I was in a relationship. I wanted to stay in that relationship. I stayed in Coventry. I got a job inputting data into a computer, working for the hospital, but they let me wear headphones. So I went to Coventry Library and I said, can I sign in to your audiobook department? And they said, now bearing in mind this was 1980, this one has been 1990. They said that this is highly irregular. I mean, normally it's just for people with impaired sight. You have your sight is fine. I went, well, I just want to listen to some books. So I was allowed access to this.
Wow.
And in the mornings I'd listen to the difficult shit, I'd listen to Shakespeare or whatever, and I'd have a little drawer next to my computer where I'd write notes, and go, Timon of Athens, never again. And then in the afternoon, kind of the easy stuff. So I'd listen to a Gerald Durrell novel or something. So I did that for a year. And so that was I couldn't get hold of the esoteric shit. there wasn't a lot of that on audiobook at the time. So I'd read that stuff in the evenings, but that was sort of part of the education that I wanted to have, reading interesting books and learning, reading wider, and learning about other things. But I'm always drawn back. If sitting here, you can't see what I can see. I can see 9 Alan Watts books, and I can see a book I can see a book on Buddhism. I can see Merlin Sheldrake's Entangled Life, Jeremy Lent's Patenting Instinct, and Carlo Rovelli's There Are Places in the World Where Rules Are Less Important Than Kindness. Those have all recently been read. And I still have a voracious appetite for ideas and books. And I feel like I'm still catching up,
Oh, I think that it'll always be that way, because, when you think of, I'm in a room of books. There are now no more room on the shelves. They're on the floors around me. And someday, I'm going to be here till I'm 200. So I hope I have enough time to do it. So when you left that job in the hospital, where did you go into? When did you start writing, and when did you get into your music?
Well, music had always been a passion. I've been playing music. I bought myself a little keyboard with my paper round money when I was, I think, 11, 12. And I've been playing and recording, well, not recording from the age of 12, but recording from the age of 16. So I came to Brighton. I did a teacher training course, because still kind of that pressure of kind of do the right thing and conformity. So I did that, and I joined a band, and I got a part-time job as a music teacher in a school that ended up lasting for 23 years. Now, wow. The job I took, just sometimes you look back at your life and you go, thank God that happened. Thank God I came to Brighton. Thank God I left Doncaster. Thank God I took that job that was only a day and a half a week, but was a permanent contract, which meant that they couldn't get rid of me. Because at the end of my first year, the head said, you will go full time now. And it's like, no bloody chance. It's like, this is great. I can just live off the money with a bit of other, bits and bobs on the side. And I've got all this free time. I've got this free time to pursue other things. So I played in bands, and in '94 we went to New York. I had a band called Luminous who went to New York and recorded with a producer called Kramer, who ran a label called Shimmy Disc, and who had great bands like there was a band called When People Were Shorter and Lived Near the Water. He was in a band called Bongwater. There was Dog Bowl. It was a great label to be part of, and we recorded out there. And I thought kind of stardom awaited. I'd only been in my job a few months, and I thought I'd be out of there. And then 23 years later, there you go. So the album didn't take off. The label had some problems, and then I formed a band called Oddfellows Casino, and we celebrated our 20th anniversary last year. We've released 9 albums, and made a short film, and had a lot of our stuff on the radio. And I'll tell you a nice story about Oddfellows. We're a cult band, we're a niche band. We have a nice following in places like kind of France and Spain and parts of Scandinavia. But we got approached by a music festival in Estonia, and the promoter said, "Will you come to Estonia and play at this festival?" And I said, "Yes, great, love to do that." What's the capacity? He said, "Well, there'll be about 1,500 people coming to see you." It was a toss-up between you and a band called Red House Painters and a band called Lamb Chop. And I went, bloody hell. Because I mean, particularly Lamb Chop, it's like we were chosen over Lamb Chop. I think we were a bit cheaper. So we went out there and we did this gig in front of 1,500 people, which was bonkers.
Wow.
Normally we play in front of, 30. And the population of Estonia is less than 1 million. This was a significant amount of people for the population. So I said to the guy, why have we got such a big following out here in Estonia? And he said, biscuits. I said, you've got to explain that. So he said, there are 2 music promoters in Estonia, me and a friend, blah, blah, blah. And we're sort of quite competitive with each other. We're always trying to dig out, the next interesting, unknown British band. And also, we both really like biscuits, and we really like English biscuits. And so the Holy Grail...
Biscuits isn't a band, you mean?
No, Biscuits isn't a band, just biscuits. And he said, the Holy Grail would be to find an obscure English band who sang a song about and mentioned biscuits. And he said, and then I found Oddfellows Casino. And there's a song at the beginning of our second album, Winter Creatures, where I'm sort of singing the introduction. I'm welcoming the listener to the album. And I sing the line, "There's biscuits in the cupboard just for you." And then I start whistling. I don't just sing that line. It's the end of the and so that was, they just thought that was the best thing ever. And he said, you will be playing your song "Camping on the Moon" for us, because that's been, a bit of a hit over here. And nobody had ever mentioned that song before or ever expressed any interest in it. So we had to, kind of rehearse that and gigs. So the Cult of Water was released as our 8th or 9th album, I forget now, with Alan Moore's on it, and it's a spoken word album with music, which is the first time we've done that. It's the rest are songs. So that's my musical check. And
I think you mentioned Dave the Bard, or you've featured on the OBOD Druidcast.
He's very kindly played a couple of tracks now. Yeah.
From the Cult of Water. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Somebody says here, Colin Stewart, I want biscuits now and I'm on a diet.
Forget the diet, eat the biscuits.
That's wonderful. So I suppose, I don't know if you've noticed since you've started on the Druid path, when Awan or Imas comes to you now, in terms of developing your own creativity, because obviously you're very, very a very creative person anyway. Have you noticed any change since you've started on this path?
In terms of the work I've been doing with the Bardic Grade?
Yeah. Has it helped you in any way, or is it?
Absolutely. And one of the things which I I think some of the practical stuff I've really appreciated, and it was for Earth Element that suggested learning poems and strengthening memory, and I find it deeply frustrating that I can read a book and, ask me in 3 months' time any detail about the book, and the detail is gone. There's a fuzzy memory of what the book was maybe about, and I struggle to learn lines if ever, on the rare occasions I've performed on stage or acted on stage, and so that was something that I really liked that as a challenge, that I would choose the poems. It would make me read more poetry. It made me write a poem, and it made me focus. And also the thing of, I can have a butterfly mind. I recognize, I associate with the air element, as I said, very strongly, too strongly, feet on the ground, not enough. And I really liked making myself read a poem, just read it, because I like to read quickly, and you can't there's no point reading a poem quickly. So
has to be safe.
The first thing I noticed was the first time I read a poem, I just need to get that over with, because then it's the second time and the third and the fourth and the fifth, and I'm actually starting to think about it. A friend, Victor, sent me a poem a couple of days ago, and I really enjoyed reading it and thinking about it. I think about poetry as, poetry is kind of poetry is the whiskey, and a novel is the beer. It's like it's distilled and refined, and it's so, there's a wonderful density to it, and I have resisted poetry for that reason. And so that's one of the many things that, and as I said, it encouraged me to write some poems as well. I really love the psychological element to it, and there was coming back to this theme again. It was reading one of the exercises that said, if you're the kind of person that thinks, oh, I know what I'll do, I'll read a handful of these during a week, and then you can kind of you can get the whole course done in 4 months. Maybe you should stop and think about the wisdom of that, and maybe it's better to let this. So, oh God, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm doing that. Thank you for pointing that out. The simplicity of, the relative simplicity of the elements as metaphors is really powerful. I think when I the times that I've talked to people who are drawn to Crowley and chaos magic and all the rest, it's like I find it all just too confusing, unnecessarily convoluted, and too much wrapped up in ego, a lot of it. And this is, there's just such clarity with this. You can work with ideas of elements and seasons and nature and day and night and polarity, but actually the connections between things that seem to be completely different, but actually have a lot in common, or tied together. It works for me. It works for me.
Yeah, I find that, I suppose it's the simplicity of it, and one of the things was finding the extraordinary in the ordinary, and this thing about you getting back into the kitchen, grounding yourself.
Yeah.
It seems like a very mundane thing, but you can discover Imas or Awen in the kitchen. You can be, when you look at the baking process is an alchemical process, that you can discover huge creativity and peace and ease and joy and fulfillment through mundane tasks.
Yeah.
I draw the line at cleaning. I do a little bit of that and that's it, but
well, I spent a month in Findhorn, the spiritual community in Scotland many years ago, as part of a year that when I was traveling around different communities, and I did a lot of cleaning there. There was a lot of cleaning, there was a lot of putting things in envelopes, and they talk about the Findhorn magic there. Did you get the Findhorn magic? Did you see the angels? Did you whatever? And and I did, and a lot of us did, but it was through it wasn't through seeing angels or it was through everyday experiences like cleaning, like cooking, in which we got to know each other, in which we listened and we talked and we shared stories and I realized it's like, the penny drops, doesn't it? You go, that's how you build compassion and empathy, by listening to people and finding out, their fears and their anxieties and their insecurities and their loves and joys and hopes. It's really straightforward, isn't it? It's really straightforward. But it's actually one of the things that I think is one of the hardest things also to discover, because, for most spiritual paths, you're told to love, and you're told to be more compassionate, and you're told to be more patient, but that doesn't help. You need to find it out for yourself. You also need to sort of discover it through others. And yes, Findhorn was a place that I had the penny dropped about. Yeah.
So it's doing mundane tasks in the company of others where you listen and.
Well, it doesn't have to be a mundane task, but when you're doing, you can go into that where you're just doing the task without having to think too much about the task. And so I remember cleaning the Julian's saying nothing about the kitchen's mundane. Of course, it's true. But in terms of in a community, yes, when there's 6 or 7 of you in the kitchens washing up, hundreds of pans and plates, you chat, you communicate, you commune, and it's but it was learning that everyone was there for a reason. People had gone there because they were dealing with illness, they were dealing with loss, they were oh God, look at that! Findhorn just lost its community space and spiritual center in a fire yesterday. That's terrible to hear.
Oh, yesterday! Wow.
Their community space was beautiful. I'm sure they'll rebuild it. They're a community. They will rebuild it. But yes, that was one of the experiences of visiting different communities. Really was learning about other people, listening to other people, learning their stories and their adventures, their journeys. And of course, you see through that we're all made of the same stuff. We all have the same, share most of the same feelings, and blimey, we just don't take the time to listen, do we?
And I think the value of listening can never be underestimated. Do you have a daily practice? Well,
thanks to you guys, yeah. But I wouldn't say daily practice. I'd say most days. I struggle a bit with insomnia, and if I have a bad night's sleep, I can't always do the ritual that I like to do. But usually I get up at 6 and light a fire and arrange a sacred space in my living room, and I will meditate and sometimes do rituals, and I will do reading, and I will be reciting a poem or learning a poem, or I will be putting my hands in water if I'm reading and learning about reconnecting with water. So yes, OBOD has allowed that, and in the past, yes, more straightforward. I'd say I was meditating, but I'm a big fan of Alan Watts, and Alan Watts was one of those 60s kind of hedonist, sensualist, spiritual philosophers who would say, oh, you don't need to meditate every day. A cat eats when it's hungry and sleeps when it's tired. We should take the same approach to spirituality. Can't be doing with all this. It's 7 o'clock and I must do my yoga exercises. So there's a bit of that in me too. But I mean, Alan Watts was also a heavy drinker and a heavy smoker, and not that responsible for his family. So he was a flawed human being like all of us. But I think, but I would say most mornings, life does not feel. Sorry, go on.
Go on.
Life doesn't feel complete without it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, you do it at the beginning of the day. I'm the same. If I don't do it at the beginning of the day, it doesn't happen. Where I know other people I've chatted to, do it before they go to bed, and it prepares them for the nighttime. And where me, I need it in the morning. But I like that notion of, and this is what I really appreciate about OBOD is, well, this is what you might like to try. This is what you might like to do. If it feels right, you do it. A bit like Alan Watts, you don't have to do it every day.
Yeah.
But that you find a practice or a way of being that works for you rather than it being dictated to. And then within the order and within the teachings, there's huge scope for you to express that. I remember Howard, my husband, he would go out into our grove. We have a grove of trees that we planted when I joined the order first. And he'd sit there with a cup of coffee and he'd be listening to the birds and observing nature. And he was very, he came from a Quaker tradition. So though he wasn't a Quaker, but he grew up in Sheffield, and he went to school in Yorkshire in a Quaker school there. But so he liked stillness and silence. And that was his practice, all of it valid. And that's what I loved about the order I still do love about it, that there's such a range of practices that people can engage in that has relevance and meaning for them.
Yeah, well, the group I was with before, they had very fixed ideas about how you should and shouldn't live your life, and one of them was our group leader would go on and on and on about not spilling the seed. He was very fixated about that, and him and his partner were doing these complicated sort of tantric exercises because they were building up to give birth to the next to the next super child, and that would be through the release of a single sperm. That was supposedly what when they were split up before that.
Oh my God.
But it was just like, oh blimey, can we just sort of do what we can we decide for ourselves rather than be told what is or isn't right in terms of our sexual practice. Yes, it's it reminds me of it's like Buddhism, it's not being dictated to, it's being given some ideas to play with. It's as simple as being given ideas to play with, like in Buddhism, which will start by saying, okay, you're new here, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Close your eyes and try not to think for 5 minutes, and see what happens. Right, let's talk about that. And here we are. We're off on a journey. I did a philosophy course many years ago with I can't remember the name of the group now, in Brighton, and it was such a lovely course and also it was so ridiculously simple. I thought, this is a wonderful idea, and we had someone who guided the conversation. There was about, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 of us in the room, and the chap who was leading it would say, okay, welcome. We'd do a little meditation, a little bit of prayer, a little ritual, and he'd say, okay, today we're going to talk about love. So what do we think love is? And that was it. And that, and then we talked, and occasionally he would throw in questions, but we led the conversation, we shared the conversation, we listened, we challenged each other, and you realize, by the third or fourth one, where he comes in and says, well, today we're going to talk about work, and you think, well, that's hardly a philosophical thing, So someone would say, well, work is, when you do what you're paid for. Sorry, when you're paid what you do, during the day, say. And someone went, well, no, but I work in the garden. I don't get paid for working in the garden. You go, here we go, right? Okay, so actually, what is work, and how do we define these things? And you realize, you could choose anything. You could choose fish fingers, and you could talk about that and have a philosophical conversation. I really liked it because it wasn't dictated. It was we created that conversation and those philosophical ideas with someone who was able to guide us, who was gifted in making sure that people didn't dominate or present something too closed or too dogmatic. Those are the systems that encourage people to join, not the ones that go out with sticks, as we used to do, kind of as missionaries. I was talking with a friend of mine who'd been to Vanuatu, the collection of islands in Polynesia, and talking about the missionaries that went out there and forced, the islanders to wear clothes. And what did they achieve with that? They gave them Western diseases by giving them clothes, by making them wear their clothes. They wiped out half, by forcing them Like, it doesn't come through force, does it? It comes through. Nobody came to me and twisted my arm that weekend and said, you need to join OBOD. It was just, I was drawn to it because of the connections and the kind of people that I could see around me.
Well, indeed, you are very welcome. What would you say has been your greatest achievement? The thing that you're most proud of, apart from joining OBOD? But
it's difficult. Those questions that have gone there because the mind vacillates between people and connections with people and loved ones and all the rest. And then there's another part of you that goes, that book you wrote, and your partner's going, what, me? I remember seeing Lemmy from Motorhead being interviewed years ago, and there's a close camera on him, and the guy says, what's your proudest achievement? And Lemmy goes, oh, well, it's got to be Ace of Spades, or it's got to be being in Auckland, or it's got to be kind of putting 20 albums out and getting a gold whatever. And then he pauses and he goes, and also my son. And the camera pans back and the son is sitting next to him, kind of giving him a funny look. So I'm going to say, okay, so loved ones aside, I guess it would be, it wouldn't be any one thing. It would be, look, just being a lad growing up in Doncaster who didn't have connections, didn't come from an affluent family or connected family, and the things that I've wanted to do in my life in terms of goals with things that I've created or those sort of achievements, I've just worked bloody hard at those, and I feel proud of myself in working hard. So being able to make programs for the BBC, for radio, for Radio 3, Radio 4, being able to have books published, being able to have albums published, and it not through me just, asking a friend to phone a friend and that being able to happen, but actually the more traditional way of just I have a friend, Graham, here in Brighton, who's a very successful comedy writer. He writes for everyone you've ever heard of. They'll know the name Graham Duff, as a script writer, as a performer, etc. And I once said to Graham, what's the secret of your success? And he's a northerner as well. He's from Manchester. He said, when I haven't got any work on, I'm still working. And he said that to me about 25 years ago, and that stuck with me. And, because I know plenty of people, they just go, well, I couldn't get the Arts Council grant, so I'm not going to bother doing that. And I'm a great fan of, I was greatly influenced by the performer Ken Campbell. And I saw Ken Campbell performing in Brighton in 1992. He went on stage and he talked for 2.5 hours, non-stop. And I was enchanted and enthralled with his storytelling. And I thought one day I want to do that. I waited, 12, 13 years until I felt like I had a story that was an autobiographical story that was worth telling. But Ken used to say, I got to know him a little bit. And he said, everything you do, try and make it so that you could do it at the back of a pub. Don't have these, so that, in other words, so that it's portable, so that it's malleable, so that it's accessible. And there's this lovely story about when Ken ran a thing called the Ken Campbell Roadshow back in the late 60s. He was paid by the Bolton Octagon to do this as a means of, he was paid to go into pubs and working men's clubs, unannounced often, and do this show, which had people like Bob Hoskins and David Rappaport and Sylvester McCoy were all part of the roadshow, and they were to go into the pubs and clubs, do a performance, and then at the end announce that Waiting for Godot was on at the Bolton Octagon. And Ken realized, the whole lot of them, realized that if you're to go into a venue where people haven't asked you to be and they're trying to have a pint, it's got to be good. This is uninvited art. It's got to be good. So they had these anarchic, raucous, hilarious slapstick routines that they worked out. And Ken realized that he really didn't want to be doing this stuff in the theatre. He compared theatre to churches, kind of like cold, dusty buildings. And the pubs and clubs were where people congregated. So what he took to doing was going in, doing these shows, And then at the end, he'd stand on the table and he'd go, Bolton Octagon have paid me to tell you to go and see Waiting for Godot, which is on at the minute, but I've seen it and it's shite, so I wouldn't bother if I were you. And then they found out and they stopped funding him, but it didn't matter because the roadshow became a success in its own right, and they toured Europe with it, which is, it's great. It's like, take the art to the people, make it inclusive. I try and think about how Ken would approach things. I think about accessibility and inclusivity. They're important to me, and maybe that is slightly due to a kind of northern working class chip on my shoulder kind of thing. I don't know.
Well, I think it's wonderful because I think it needs to be accessible to everybody, because everybody people can appreciate story, theatre, performance, music, be it in a pub or a theatre. Somebody says your background and energy remind me in some way of Michael Palin, who was from Sheffield.
Oh, who was from Sheffield? Thank you. That's very nice to say. Yeah.
So you have a book, The Haunted Mustache. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll do it very briefly. It's hard not to feel if one feels self-indulgent in these.
Well, this is all about you tonight, David.
I know. I wrote this quite a few years ago now. It started life as a Radio 3 program. I'd been trying for years to get into radio. It's very difficult. The BBC is a very difficult institution to get into, because a lot of people are kind of throwing ideas at them, and they're just batting you away. And I got to know a producer, and I said to her, I inherited a mustache when I was 21 years old from my great aunt Sylvia, a mustache in a box, a mustache that had been a real, not her mustache, a mustache that had been cut off from a freak show host from the turn of the century who retired to the village Woodall Spa in Lincolnshire that my great aunt Sylvia was born and died at the age of 96. And I said I went on this journey when I moved to Brighton in trying to find out who this man was who had left his mustache and why my aunt Sylvia had ended up with it, because I didn't know, and I didn't know why she'd left it to me in her will, which is what happened. And so I visited spiritual churches and I went to seances and did all the unconventional things because I was new to Brighton and I had a partner who was into all that stuff. And that's partly why I joined the cult and started drinking ayahuasca. And I was telling this producer, I said, would this make an interesting story for radio? And she said, well, yeah, it probably would. And I said, do you think we could record a live ayahuasca ceremony for radio? And that swung it because it had never been done before. People taking psychedelic drugs live on Radio 3, and then at the last minute they got cold feet and they thought, oh, maybe we shouldn't do this. So instead we talked about those experiences, and we talked to someone who led those ceremonies. But it went down very well. It was very well received, and it became a monologue that I tell on stage, which evolved into me trying to understand what magic is. So I use this story, this autobiographical story, as a way into talking about magic and connection between things. And the picture I love the cover. The cover is a picture of a man with a fireplace on his head, whose name was Dave Soot, and I sort of cut my teeth as a performer, I suppose, in a kind of gong show, freak show in Brighton in the 90s called the Zinc Bar, where it was one of those nights where anything goes. You could do whatever you wanted to. Again, it was inclusive, and it was very welcoming, and it was £1 to get in. And you could do anything you wanted to on stage as long as it was under 6 minutes. So I started doing storytelling. And Dave Soot was one of the regulars who used to do these he was one of these Dadaist performers who would never speak, but would go on stage with something like a fireplace on his head and do some kind of act. And one night, Dave goes on stage, and his partner painted him in plaster of Paris, covered his body in plaster of Paris, and he'd held this sort of situationist pose, and his body set solid with this plaster of Paris. And he remained. That was his performance. He remained on stage for while other acts came on in the background. And what he hadn't thought through was that he'd had a few pints of beer before doing it. And he wet himself on stage. So we were all going on, sliding around in Dave's suits, piss on. Happy days they were. They were happy days. And so the book is sort of memories of Brighton, a sort of coming of age story in a way, but also about our relationship with objects and how we invest meaning in everything around us, and that essentially is my understanding of what magic is. So it's about how I invested a lot of my time in this and energy into this family heirloom to try and discover the story behind it, and as a consequence, I ended up on stage with Nick Cave and Billy Childish, the artist, because we were all invited to be judges for the World Beard and Moustache Championship in 2007, and I was the only judge. There were loads of judges. I was the only one who didn't have a moustache, but I was the guy who had inherited a moustache that everyone knew about because I told these stories at the Zinc Bar. So I ended up sat between Nick Cave, who I'm a huge fan of, and Billy Childish. And I thought to myself, I wouldn't be here if I'd not invested in the moustache, and that's, to me, that's magic. That's great.
Thanks to your Aunt Sylvia. There's a question here for you. I have to give her some credit. From Yvonne, question for David. Here in the States, we get a lot of backlash if we're not Christians or not following their traditional ways. Do you get any backlash where you are for your beliefs?
Well, I don't in Brighton, because Brighton is a city where anything goes. Brighton is the gay capital of the UK. It has the third largest arts festival, fringe festival in the world. It's a wonderful town. It's incredibly bohemian and very accepting. It's a town where, actually, to be honest, if you were to go around as a Christian in Brighton, that would probably be the most unorthodox thing you could do, because you throw a stick and you'll find a Zen Buddhist and an anarchist and a pagan and a member of OBOD. But in terms of where I grew up, which is a more kind of straightforward industrial town, I probably. I was once threatened in my local pub for wearing a hat. That's the kind of that sort of small town mentality. Really, is more likely to be directed at how you look. There's a great Bell and Sebastian line where he sings something like, "He wore a quiff as large as small town beatings would permit," and that's such a perfect insight into how individual can you be, and what can you get away with before they start coming after you with sticks. I think in terms of my family, if I was to talk about this kind of stuff, which they don't, my nephew takes interest in it, the rest don't. It's mainly just sort of dismissed as nonsense. So I don't think I've never really experienced if I again in the wrong circles, saying what I'm about to say can cause conflicts, but I don't think it will tonight. The most prejudice that I experience per se from people around me is from the science community. I do a lot of spoken word events, either hosting or sometimes giving talks myself. And I've been to events like Skeptics in the Pub, and I've hosted TED events or TEDx events. And the prejudice that I find to be most apparent is scientists who are incredibly intolerant of anything that they judge through the lens of science to be pseudoscientific. In fact, I was writing about it today. I think it very interesting that, Wikipedia is. You look at the word pseudoscience on Wikipedia. My God, that list! My God, it's pretty much everything that isn't science is listed as pseudoscience by Wikipedia. I'm writing and researching a book about Alan Watts and his ideas at present, and I was writing about the kind of the Taoist idea of the universe as a single living organism. And I thought, I wonder how this ties in with intelligent design. And so I Googled intelligent design, and by the 5th word in Wikipedia, it had been dismissed as pseudoscientific. The 5th word. It's like, this is a desperate desire to make sure it's clear right from the start that all of these ideas that are considered non-scientific are bullshit. So I would say if anything, and I realize, of course, there is religious intolerance there is intolerance per se across the world. Is one of our great failings as a species, I think, or one of our great challenges. But yes, science.
It's interesting because there are a lot of, we'll say, quantum science. There are lots of science that support scientists interested in consciousness, for example.
Yeah.
But if you look at the word empirical, so I'm a psychologist. So what I was taught that empiricism refers to double-blind, randomized controlled trials, etc. But also another meaning to empirical is something that has had thousands of years of use. So for the example of, let's say in India, that for thousands of years they've been using turmeric as an anti-inflammatory. That's empirical. It's based on, thousands and thousands of folk use. So when herbs have been used for the treatment of whatever it is, just because it hasn't been subjected to randomized controlled trials, it doesn't mean it's not valid. That empiricism also applies to a long history of use. So I think a lot of when people talk about pseudoscience, that a lot of people say, well, I believe in science. Well, sorry, science is not a belief system. It's like, say you believe in science is no more rational than saying I believe in God. And I believe in God, of course, isn't rational, but we're not all rational. Neither is art or music or literature or poetry. There's nothing rational about it.
No,
it hits.
Which is the point.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and it's interesting. The people who've had a go at me are other pagans, not Christians. I taught in a seminary for 27 years where people knew I'm a priestess in the Fellowship of Isis, dedicated to Danu, a druid. People have been fascinated, and even in Ireland, and I grew up, in a very, very strong Roman Catholic background. Even my mother now has listened to me on doing the tea with the druid, and actually thought it was nice because it was about nature. She discovered I'm not going to hell, but that people were interested. So I've had, and this is Ireland, where I grew up in a very, very strongly Roman Catholic culture. It's changed now, the last 20 years with all the shenanigans that have gone on. At the church level, at the political level. But it's interesting that anyone who's had a go at me have been other pagans, not people from a Christian or fundamentalist background.
And is that because of what Grayson Perry talks about, the vanity of small differences, where it's people having slightly different views to you, and that weird thing where when you're really close to something, you can find yourself really disliking it. And from the outside, people don't get it because they go, "Well, you guys are on the same page, so why would you be bickering?" I many years ago, I was involved in a festival in Brighton called Occulture, and we billed ourselves as being the world's largest festival of occultism, because as far as we knew, there weren't any others, so we could do that. And there were some great characters. I met some great, got to see people like Colin Wilson speaking back in 2001. Ken Campbell came, and we had the Church of Satan, we had pagans and witches. But the only time there was ever conflict, when it nearly kicked off, was when a chap called Armando Crowley came to give a talk, who claimed to be the bastard son of Aleister Crowley. And in the audience were people who were followers of Aleister Crowley, and it all got ugly. And I remember thinking, it doesn't get more niche, does it? For a start, it's a festival of occultism, which is already niche, and it's Crowley. I know Crowley's the biggest name still, perhaps associated with that, but still, this, it doesn't get more. It's like Life of Brian, isn't it? I bet, yeah, I love it.
I mean, the pagan equivalent, or how many fairies dance on top of toadstools, or how many feathers do fairies have on their wings. We're going to argue about that. It's a bit like, how many angels dance on the head of a pin. It's not important,
I think I've yet one of the things. Sorry, one of the things I've yet to experience, because I haven't dug deep enough in terms of I've not been with the group for long enough, and I've not ploughed sufficiently through the various grades. But I know from listening to you and to Philip and Ronald Hutton that there's a lot of disagreement and differences of opinion about traditions and how things should be done, how things should be named, and whether it's appropriate to do this, or whether this is cultural appropriation. I've yet to discover all of that. So, but I mean, all systems suffer from that, don't they, or have to deal with that?
I think so. And again, I suppose to come back to the order is that there is room for many worldviews, and that's one thing I really, really value about it. That you can be a Druid and come from any other tradition and practice and bring a synthesis for yourself. It's up to you, the individual, and that not just tolerance, but acceptance of all views, because none of us has a monopoly on the truth. We do have our common values, and that's what draws us together. And then there's space for any other form of expression. And I think there's so much freedom in that. And I think that's why so many people come, because we don't have dogma, and we don't have our 10 commandments, and we don't have a notion of sin or guilt. We have our own internal moral compass. And that's why so many people want to come, because I think for many, there are many people who want certainty, and then they go to maybe a more traditional religious path that offers certainty. Druidry doesn't. And then for many people who don't want that, who want to engage with the unknown, engage with the mystical, engage with that freedom to explore your own path.
For me, a word that I've been drawn to all my life. I'm a sucker for this word, and if you were to use it in relation to a book, a film, or an album, or a whatever, I'd be like, oh, I might have to watch that, read that, see that, and that's enchantment, and the idea of re-enchantment, the idea of being in a culture which has become disenchanted.
Yes.
Enchantment was one of the many draws to OBOD, and enchantment comes through many ways. The reconnection with nature through art and through culture and through humanity, through community. But I think it is one of the failings of modern Western society is we have lost that sense of enchantment. We as cultures, as the politics of our countries, and is to serve an economy, isn't it? The economy comes first. Capitalism is served first before the needs of the environment, before the needs of humans. And disenchantment is a consequence of that for many. So it's a word that's very special to me.
And it's interesting, when you say like the with the West, and then there's a part of me goes, well, hold on a minute now. Look what we're doing here. We're having a conversation, and I think of the world that I occupy, which is a lot of Druids, a lot of pagans, and a lot of people who don't describe themselves as pagans, but who share similar values to me, who care about the environment, who care about justice, who care about peace. That there is enchantment there. That there are pockets of it that I think hopefully is growing. And the fact that we're having conversations like that, and this fireside chat's happening online. I don't know if this would have happened if we didn't have a pandemic. Because it's almost like, how do we engage with people? And I'm really enjoying it, and people are responding really, really well. And I know there are a lot of people. You're assuming that a lot of people are members of the order, but there are people who are not. That somehow it's providing some platform for people to engage with ideas. I think it's growing. And what's lovely about this is we're not looking for numbers. It's not like we're out spreading the good news or out needing to proselytize, but that there's that a space
not beholden to your shareholders. That's a good thing. You don't have to exponential growth. I mean, I agree with you, and I like to think of myself as an optimist, and I'm not one of those. I don't subscribe to kind of the doom and gloom or underdog socialism, as the Dutch writer Rutger Bregman calls it. One of the things that I noticed when I did that year visiting different communities, I went to Christiania, the anarchist community in Copenhagen, and I talked to some of the founders there, and I noticed that every Monday, I think it was, the group went out and they scavenged parts of the city for things that they felt that they could legitimately bring back and recycle. And they said recycling has been part of this part of our community since 1971 or whenever they started. And I thought, that's extraordinary. 1971, this community were recycling. I bet anyone that encountered Christiania back then would have thought, what a weird thing to do. I bet they're all vegetarians as well. What a bunch of freaks. It was such a niche thing. And nowadays we take, veganism, vegetarianism, yoga classes, meditation, well-being, recycling, all these things, we take them all for granted. They've become part of our everyday life. So I think we need to take hope that these things are growing. And I can't remember who said this. Maybe it was somebody like Rutger Bregman. Maybe it was, I don't know, who said, if you were to take all of these pockets, all of these organizations, all of these movements, all of these groups who have these shared values, like the shared values in OBOD, if you put them together, you might find that actually that's way, way bigger than the powers and the forces that that cause destruction and cause division and cause greed and cause and perpetuate individualism and all the rest. And I think that might be right. It's a question of how long we have to be able to allow these things to grow and on a grassroots level be able to transform things. Absolutely. I'm just looking at a cup of tea. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's lucky you. This is Peter Wildash. I think it goes beyond capitalism. It's more about what people want out of life, and there's a huge influence in society to comply with norms and enforced mode behavior, of which materialism and the aspects of what you really mean when you use the generic expression capitalism.
Maybe so. Yeah. Okay. I'd agree with that. The ideas of Alan Watts that I'm researching at present, they are my head is full. My head is full of them. When you've got too much going on and you're trying to kind of synthesize things because there's some big ideas. And I think one of his really big ideas, which I'm still thinking about, is that we are still under the influence of what he calls two out-of-date mythologies or models. One he calls the ceramic model of the universe, which is the Christian idea that the universe had no intelligence, and it was God who brought the intelligence and life into an empty void. And the Christian version, or the Christian system, was hierarchical, just like our political and monarchical systems are hierarchical, with a monarch at the top or a god at the top. Science came along and said we're kind of done with that. We're sort of fed up with all of the sin and the judgment and all the rest of it. So we'll remove God from the narrative, but we'll kind of keep everything else. We'll keep the laws. We'll keep the hierarchy. We'll put us at the top. Animals are underneath us. Nature is underneath us. We're allowed to or we give ourselves permission to exploit, to conquer. We use this language is still there, and we live still under the shadow of those mythologies, which is why the disconnect from nature, because it's in our bones, to believe that or to not feel that sense of interdependence and interconnection, which it seems that our ancestors, animist cultures, were more tuned into that. And this is not a romanticism as in we go back to the past. You can't go back to the past, but you can learn, and you can try and bring something back. It's the re-enchantment is that reconnection. And I think there's a lot in that, and there's a lot to think about. But my God, if you're in the science community, you're going to find that really challenging, because you're kind of being told that the system that you believe in is unduly influenced still by Christianity, and that it's also a myth, which it is a myth, because everything that's interpreted is a narrative, and science needs to interpret data. to be able to explain something, and then the narrative begins. And that narrative, I think, Watts is right. That narrative continues. Is that, the narrative of that we still hold in our culture, which is it's okay for factory farming. It's okay to put animals in laboratories. It's okay to torture animals because we benefit, and that's more important than the suffering of the animals. That is a narrative which science inherited from Christianity, or according to Watts anyway. And this is what I'm, kind of thinking about and thinking, this is, wow, how do you change that narrative? That's a paradigm shift. That's a paradigm shift to say we should think about things more in terms of the fact that everything influences everything else. And then I think to myself, well, an organization like OBOD is already engaged in that kind of work. So it's theirs. I read my Alan Watts and I go, I'm in the right group. These people are doing it already.
Well, I'm a member of the Scientific and Medical Network, and they have it's a really interesting organization. It's based in the UK, but it's kind of worldwide. And I haven't gone since Howard died, but we used to go to the Mystics and Scientists Conference. It was either held in Winchester or in Warwick. Isn't that the one that's near Birmingham University? Yeah. So I mean, the first one we went to was on the nature of trees. We've done on mountains, on happiness. So you end up with tree huggers and meteorologists and chemists and healers all together looking at notions. We've done dreams, premonition, intuition. And you have scientists and you have the whole mix. You'll have physicists, mathematicians, biologists, healers, psychologists, tree huggers, all together in a conference discussing these things. And there's no row. But you'll have a thing like, well, a scientist, somebody would say, well, I come from the US and my physics department or my faculty, they don't know I'm here because if they did, I'd lose my funding or whatever. So that they're behind, they're in the closet, not behind the closet, behind the door, in the closet. But they come out at these gatherings like these, and they're looking at things like near-death experience, premonition, dreams, all sorts of stuff, and looking at it and researching them. But it's a small little place. But I think it's growing.
Well, I mean, Watts does point out that, and I think this is true. It's we can unfairly, or I can unfairly sort of hold prejudices against the science community around these things, when actually the deeper problem, the bigger problem, is that these narratives are within our culture, and so it's all of us that hold.
You've frozen on me there.
Back. Sorry, am I back?
Yeah, just you stopped at these narratives we hold, and then you froze.
These narratives are ingrained within the way that we speak and the way that we think. It's within the culture, rather than scientists lording it over us and saying you should think like this. Actually, there's a lot of cutting edge science which is really starting to dismantle some of the established, the mechanical metaphors, the mechanical view of how the universe works. And reading Merlin Sheldrake's book, it was really nice to see another scientist saying, can we stop using mechanical metaphors? They don't work in any way. In fact, there's a real problem here, and that is something that is built needs a designer. It needs a god, like we build things, we build mechanical contraptions, but the intelligence comes from outside of the thing. And that's not how, that's not how nature works at all. And mechanical things don't grow themselves. It doesn't work. And yet we still think mechanically, in terms of things pinging around, like billiard balls, that, a straightforward cause and effect. But it's in our language. So, what says, why do we say my heart beats? We take ownership, but we don't take responsibility. Why don't we say I beat my heart? And I said this to a friend who's a scientist just a few days ago, and he said, well, I don't beat my heart. I can't control it. It's a mechanical operation within me. And I said, so what are you in control of? And he went, well, I'm in control of my thought. Oh, well, I'm maybe not in control of my... Well, nothing then. All right, you've made your point. I'm not in control of anything. So everything's mechanical. You know, okay, that wasn't where we were going with this, but it's, yeah, I like it when, you know, it's interesting when language starts to reveal the narratives that we inhabit. Yes. Yeah. Anyway.
Oh, it's just wonderful. Okay. You mentioned a number of things you've done, but I'm going to ask you, what is the most reckless thing you've done?
The most reckless. In terms of the most, the thing that I mean, I wouldn't say it was reckless, but I mean, coming back to something I've already mentioned, I would say the first time I took ayahuasca was probably the most challenging, experience, because it, you know, you really do sort of face the skeletons in the closet, and also being someone who really doesn't enjoy being sick, the purgative element of that experience is very powerful. So but I mean, it wasn't a reckless experience. It was, you know, I ended up taking it quite a few times, but it was deeply challenging. Maybe I'm not reckless enough as a person, but I can think of a time that I was truly reckless. It's a really good question. I've never been asked that question before. I'll probably think of a good answer in about an hour's time.
Okay, because I think it's the most reckless thing I've done, you know, but it wasn't reckless in the end, that I knew it was the right thing to do, but somebody else would have. So, for example, I'll just tell you, I was 9 months separated from my first husband, and I met Howard, my second husband, and he was 9 months widowed. A month later, we went out, and 7 months later, we got married. Now, most people would say that is a crazy, reckless thing to do, but I knew deep down it wasn't. It was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I had my daughter at 42 here in this room, just over there. And that would have been considered, because I failed the first time. I had a cesarean section, failed home birth with my first child. That would have been considered a reckless thing. It was the right thing to do. So there's sometimes, you know, you do what appears to be reckless from another perspective, but actually it was the right thing to do. That's why I always ask the question, rather than, you know, how many times did you get stoned? Okay, that could be a reckless thing to do, but it's a more complex question, I think. So
well, you're talking about following your heart as well, aren't you? In a sense, with you know, where your heart's leading you rather than your head.
And that can be considered, you know, absolutely, because for some people it's considered the wrong thing to do, but actually, and of course, you don't know if it was the wrong thing until you've experienced the outcome. I see cesarean section is not a failure. That's how I felt at the time. I agree it isn't, but that's how I felt. I'm talking about feelings rather than actual facts, or that's what it felt like to me. But so there's not a casting a judgment on anybody else, but it was a painful experience for me. I mean, emotionally, but so it's kind of, if it worked out well, it wasn't reckless. If it didn't, so like taking your ayahuasca, did you have a good outcome? Did you gain from it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think always when taking psychedelics, but it's never an easy ride for me doing those things. I don't think, woohoo, I'm gonna take some more mushrooms. I might. In fact, I've done a little bit of microdosing in more recent times, which is I think is a friendlier approach to it. Yes, I can't think of any experiences that have challenged me psychologically so much as doing that, or enchanted me as much. I mean, I do not know whether I, in my head or some other means, have traveled to the far-flung reaches of the universe, but I have a very clear memory of doing that, and what an exhilarating and astonishing experience it was. I mean, and I love that about psychedelics, that, you know, afterwards you think, what was that? Was that just like a dream? Did I just dream that? Did I actually do it? Or did I, you know, what was it? And I don't know. I experienced telepathy on ayahuasca the first time, which is, it was part of the original Latin name was something like telepathis or something. It's a common experience. So was that idea planted in my head that I would have a telepathic communication with the Colombian shaman who was running the first session where we were doing the drinking? So that, you know, or did that actually happen? Or does it only happen within the confines of the ayahuasca experience? You know, I don't know, but I very clearly had a conversation in my head with him, which helped me deal with anxieties that were coming up. One of the things that we did it in a very traditional setting, and they had this idea that all the men, they do it on their own, like bloody standing stones or kneeling. We were, you know, in the room, and all the women could get together and they could hug and they could laugh and they could cry and there could be a community. Wow. And I was thinking, why can't we do that? Why does it have to be bloody blokes on their own, you know, like Pardon?
A very good question. It seems so unfair.
Yeah, I think it was a traditional, you know, it was kind of a traditional approach. It's, you know, that thing of individualism that I grew up with as a kid, watching James Bond films and films like Casablanca and thinking, oh, that's what you're meant to do. That's what you're meant to be as a bloke. You're meant to be kind of mysterious and alone a lot, and you know, kind of and not give much away and hide your emotions. And you try it, you know, you kind of loiter at the shops for a bit, or, you know, you go on holiday with your family and you just kind of hang around moodily. And it wasn't long before I thought, this is really boring. I'm really not enjoying any part. And I'd see women and just how much more communal and kind of together and sharing. Absolutely. You think, yeah. Why can't we do that? And even when you go to in those brief moments of my life where I've joined a gym and then regretted it after about, I don't know, kind of a month. And I go in the men's changing room, and everyone's just silent. And there's a guy undressing himself in front of the mirror, and everyone's looking at him thinking, what a dick. But nobody says anything. And if someone does speak to you, you think, what does he want? You know, as I'm taking my pants off, why is he talking to me? And then I talk to my female friends, and they go, oh, we had such a laugh at the gym today. Do you know, in the changing room, this woman was saying blah, blah, blah. And then we all went out, and then we had cocktails, and they go, that never happens. Right, it never happens. Why are men like that? But the men I've met through OBOD, totally different.
Oh, completely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, there's the warmth of the men, I mean, and the women. I mean, I suppose I'm always drawn more. I find women easier. I suppose I've lived in cultures where the sexes are separated, so I will always go towards women because it's much easier. But going to OBOD, because the genders are fairly well balanced, and it's a very warm place to be. Absolutely. So I couldn't agree with you more. Somebody says, because men are indoctrinated to be stoic. That's true.
Yeah.
And then there's Peter said, what words bring you... he says, what words bring you joy? But what, not just words, but what gives you joy?
Well, my partner Anne gives me great joy, and friends and community, and all, you know, the things that we haven't been able to participate in for quite some time. The things that have given me joy in lockdown when I've not been able to. I do like to socialize. I love festivals. I love. I know I've come to realize, you know, through talking to friends about how they respond to situations, and I realize in the past I probably didn't have the patience, I suppose, with people who were intimidated by social gatherings, parties and things. You know, so I think, oh, come on, you know, pull your socks up, you know, it's great, we're gonna have a. But I realize, you know, I understand from in talking to people who describe themselves as introverts, this idea of feeling that all their energy goes, they have to recharge the batteries after social gatherings, and I don't. I recognize that I totally feed off that. That I really enjoy. I enjoy meeting new people. I love talking to new people, finding out what makes them tick, and kind of sharing stuff. But during the pandemic, it's been very simple pleasures that have been great joys. So walking, being in nature. I'm a bird watcher. I love looking at things. I love looking at all aspects of nature. There's something about birds because there's plenty of them around, and they move around a bit, so they keep you interested for that. And animals are kind of in short supply, unfortunately, in this country. So birds are great things to watch. So I've done an awful lot of bird watching. I bought Anne her first pair of binoculars for her birthday last year. Got her hooked. Yes. And she'd be going, "Oh, I hear there's some crossbills about Ashdown Forest. Shall we go have a look?" And I think, yes, my job here is done. And and I love making music. I love playing music with other people. I love writing music. I like culture. I love culture. I love art and films and theatre. Just, I don't know. Yeah, just people making stuff and sharing things. I love mystery. Someone was asking earlier on about the word esoteric. I like esoteric, odd things. What somebody called unpopular culture. I'm kind of drawn to the weird and the wonderful. Have a great attraction to me. I struggle a bit with the everyday kind of things. I'm not a sit at home and kind of watch soap operas in the evening kind of person, but I can't imagine anybody at OBOD is, or anybody watching is. Well, I've certainly watched a lot more TV in the last year, I must say, a lot more films. But we've tried to set ourselves little projects with watching different themes, different film directors, and having a little online film club with friends in Cambridge as well, which has been good fun. I don't get bored. I just there's always too many things to do and not enough time.
I think that's a wonderful complaint. I remember as a child, Sundays being so boring. So we went to mass, then we had Sunday lunch, and then there was a GAA match on, and the radio was on. So no matter where you went, if you went beside the river, somebody had a transistor. And I remember that sound. And even now it'll bring me back to long, boring Sundays and how long they were. And now just days and minutes. I'm busy. It's just, I don't know what that means. It's, which is a lovely complaint. Somebody says, Tollive Stewart, the silence at dawn and dusk with the liminal time. Obviously, that's something that gives him joy. Yeah. And Peter says, the robins have just hatched in his window box. That's lovely.
Wow, it's early as well, isn't it? Is that early for robins? I don't know.
Must be. Where are we? Deptford. I don't know where that is. It sounds English, but
Deptford's London. Yeah, that's
maybe it's extra
London,
warm.
isn't it?
Maybe it's extra warm. It all depends. I'm Kilkenny, so it's cool enough. So we're about 3 weeks behind. But it's been interesting over the last few weeks watching the pairs of the bullfinches, the chaffinches, and seeing goldfinches, and I have wrens, and they and robins. They nest in the garden. I don't know if they're nesting yet, and the swallows have come. So it's I just love that. Just
one of the things that I've tried to do, and this was inspired by OBOD as well, is going. I mean, I'm a chatterbox. I'll go on a walk with somebody, and we'll talk all the way through. I'll have a great time, sharing books we've read, and I realize at the end of it, I haven't looked at a single thing. I haven't, I've been totally disengaged from the natural world around me. But I also think that's okay. I don't beat myself up about that because that's what I went to do. I knew that with that person, we would be, if we were either sitting at home chattering or walking through nature, we're walking and chattering. But it's also a very different experience to be quiet with nature. And I've been doing experiments where I just go and immerse myself in nature, and I try and connect with the entangled environment that I'm in. So and this is partly again through this this idea that I picked up partly through Watts, that, you know, we've created a culture in which we fragment and we break down and we name everything. And I'm aware that I look in a tree, and as you were saying, you know, like there's a bullfinch, there's a chaffinch, there's a wren, and it's, you know, and it is important that we name things and we understand things that way. It's also important that we need to remember that isn't reality, that it's a reality we've created for ourselves. So I've done these experiments where experiment's the wrong word, but experiences where I go and just be with nature and try and imagine what it's like to be part of that entangled environment. And sometimes I've managed it, and it's quite you know, you asked, you know, right at the beginning about a mystical experience. I would say that's the closest I've had recently to what I call a different kind of mystical experience, and it's the old chestnut, you know, where you start to feel that dissolution between you and what you consider not to be you. And I've had that. Well, I've had it in other ways as well. But most recently, that's, and I like it because it doesn't involve stimulants, and it doesn't, you know, it doesn't involve anything. It just involves it just involves me and nature and my thoughts and my feelings and my body, and so I'm keeping working with that because it's quite exciting. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know if we may have touched on it, but one concern that you have for the modern world, what bugs you about now and the world we're living in? Or what concerns you about it, I suppose? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess a lot of the things we've been talking about. I was greatly inspired by two books by the writer Rutger Bregman, who wrote Utopia for Realists, and he wrote another called Humankind. And the themes that come out of those books is that we need to change this narrative we have that life is about competition.
Yes.
And science is starting to, you know, I've been reading articles saying, oh, we got the sperm race completely wrong. You know, those guys are all helping each other, you know,
helping the strong one to get there.
Yeah. And you know, this idea of the tallest tree being the most successful, the winner of, you know, and we know that that's not the case either, though. You know, those trees are feeding extra nutrients to the other trees. This is a community that wants to support and nurture. A forest or woodland is a community. And yes, some trees, I've read, you know, The Hidden Life of Trees, and people like Merlin as well, you know, kind of have talked about this. But we live in a world in which, I mean, certainly our most notorious narcissistic and short-sighted politicians, world leaders, they inhabit that, you know, that outdated way of thinking. You know, Boris Johnson talked recently about, you know, it's good to be greedy. It's not good to be greedy. You know, that doesn't help anybody. The pandemic has shown us that cooperation and leveling out the, you know, those high levels of inequality is really important. You know, Rutger Bregman's books they're really fascinating because he looks at some of the established ideas within psychology of examples that we use, that we cite, that demonstrate that humans are essentially greedy, selfish, and this thing called veneer theory, where you scratch below the surface and, you know, we all turn into savages and Nazis if deprived of a meal or, you know, our favorite shoes or something. And he talks about Stanley Milgram's experiments in the 60s, where we, you know, and so if people don't know, you know, this was what we're told is that people were taken in for these experiments. They didn't know that everyone involved was an actor. And somebody was behind a screen where they couldn't see, and they were being asked questions. And if they got the questions wrong, the person was given an electric shock, and they were given $4 for this. And Milgram said, you know, a lot of people are prepared to turn it up to almost near fatal, you know, and torture that person for nothing, you know. And Rutger Bregman goes and looks at the work, and he takes the whole thing apart, and you know, this is not it's not the story that we've been sold. He also does the same with the Stanford prison experiment, that it was largely dramatized. And then he goes looking for a real life example of Lord of the Flies, because it's another one that's, it was taught, it had been taught in my school. I stole that book and I read it because there was 3,000 of them all curling and going brown. And I read that and I remember thinking, that's exactly what people would do. So Rutger Bregman finds an example, or finds a story from Polynesia, not far from Vanuatu, I think it was maybe one of the islands from Vanuatu, where a bunch of boys from a school had stolen a boat and they'd got lost and they ended up stuck on an island for a year and a half. And the first thing they did when they landed on the island was said, can we not fall out, please? Because, this is really serious. Let's look after each other. And when they were found a year and a half later, they had formed a community amongst themselves in which they looked out for each other. They did not stick each other's heads on spikes, and chase after each other, calling themselves Piggy and all the rest of it. It totally undermined Golding's work of fiction, but that work of fiction has been used time and again to sort of say this is what humans are like. So that that is that's something that I'd love to. I think we are seeing those changes.
I don't know if he mentions bonobo, the difference between bonobo and chimpanzees, does he? So we're equidistant from bonobos and chimpanzees. They look the same. Okay, I think bonobos might be a bit smaller. So your chimpanzees are patriarchal, hierarchical, violent, very, very dominant. There's rape, killing. They kill each other's young and all that kind of stuff. Bonobo look the same, but they're non-hierarchical. There's a spectrum of sexual orientation. There's no rape, there's no violence, and they work on, they have a culture of collaboration. So the chimpanzee is one of competition. So we're equidistant. We can take either way. We can choose to collaborate. And I suppose when they found evidence off the South African coast of, I think, I don't know how, I'm not too sure which ice age ago, but the ice had come far down into the African continent. And there's evidence of people surviving along the coast on, shellfish and things like that, but that they survived. I don't know how they came to this conclusion, but that they found that they survived because of collaboration, not because of competition.
Yeah.
Had they been competitive over the small resources, they'd have wiped themselves out. And I mean, it makes sense that we collaborate in times of adversity rather than compete. And yet that's always showing. You get these apocalyptic films like, what is the one, Waterworld and Mad Max and all that. I can't watch them. They just...
Yeah.
I like that idea. Now, Ricky Gellison says, the real Lord of the Flies, what happened when 6 boys were shipwrecked?
Yeah, thank Ricky's sharing the story that was reported in The Guardian.
That's the one you're talking about.
So,
okay.
That's the story. It's a great story. It's really worth reading. So I like Bregman. Bregman is refreshing and showing. Yeah, he's showing the good side of humanity, and without being afraid of going into the dark places and saying what happened. What happened in Germany, what happened with the Holocaust? Why did if we are trying to show that veneer theory is not our default, then why did that happen? And it's very interesting some of the information that's come out around men and their relationship to war. Most of the German soldiers who when interviewed and asked why did you fight, they said for camaraderie, for the experience of being there for another man, the intimacy of that relationship, wasn't for the ideology as much, although you can't ignore that, obviously. And also the statistics around the number of soldiers who actually fire their guns and actually fire to kill. It's a very small, or it's a relative.
Yeah. When you're talking about the changing rooms in the gym,
yeah,
you need to be in the trenches. Because it's really interesting. I'm doing a course on ecopsychotherapy. I was at a webinar, and they showed photographs of gardens planted by soldiers just behind the trenches, the First World War, that they had, and this is both the British and the Germans, that, you know, there are letters where soldiers wrote home and said, "Can you send us out seeds?" And I'm just looking at the photograph of this triangular flower bed, and there's flowers. And then you have your sandbags, and you have, it's the trenches. They needed that beauty. They needed flowers. They needed that color, and that they had the energy and, I don't know, the strength of mind and heart and soul to plant flowers in a war zone. I mean, because I don't know if you know, I've lived in 3 different African countries, and it's really interesting when you're passing through a village in, you know, rural Africa, and you'll know that somebody who is well off, as in experience themselves as well off, have enough to eat, that they will have a few pot plants. They'll have, it might be a plastic bag with earth, or a tub, or a milk carton or whatever, but they'll have flowers outside their door, and others don't, because I suppose life is too hard. And it just fascinates me that these soldiers, you know, in a trench can write home, not just for bars of chocolate and cigarettes, but they're saying, "Can you send us out some seeds? Because we'd like to plant them. We'd like to make a little garden in our trench." And it is that sense of belonging. And I think, again, the order has provided that, certainly for me, like another home. And I think when I've talked to my friends when we're at a gathering, and hopefully we will be there again, and they say, "This is my tribe. These are my people," you know, and something to do with nationality. It's got to do the common shared values and that sense of belonging to an organization. But what's lovely about the order is, unlike, it's not a tight-knit community, thank goodness, because tight-knit communities provide you with support, but then you can't stray and you can't question. Where with an OBOD you can. I mean, it sounded like there's a utopian organization. But that you have that sense of belonging, but you can also ask questions, and it welcomes diversity and different viewpoints.
Have you? My mind's gone on a bit of a tangent with this, but partly in relation to what you were saying before about the flowers in the trenches. Have you read? You know, John Fowles, the novelist, best known for French Lieutenant and The Collector.
Yes.
Have you read his book called The Tree?
No, I haven't. I went through a phase of John Fowles in my 20s. God, that's 100 years ago now. But yes, no, I haven't.
Well, I really heartily recommend it. So it's a work of non-fiction. It's a book about the environment. It's 90 pages. It's a very short. It was written in, I think it was written in 1979. It's an autobiographical ecological manifesto, call to arms. And my God, this book, considering it was written over 40 years ago, it is so forward thinking, so prescient. And he tells this great story, or rather sad story, rather tragic story. So he grew up kind of in conflict with his father, because over small things, as we all do, you know, with parents. His father had an orchard, and his father was you know, he liked a manicured lawn. He liked a manicured garden. And Fowles realized from a young age that he loved nature, he loved being in nature. He didn't like seeing nature being organized and clipped and pruned and trimmed. And he didn't kind of approve of his dad's relationship with it. You know, his dad liked the golf course and all the rest of it. Yes. And he tells a story about how they lived in this Devonshire village, and this old guy in the village, tragically, his wife died, and he kind of lost his mind. And Fowles says that the other villagers, you know, kind of looked out for him. You know, they made sure he was okay. They, you know, expressed sympathy for what had happened, until they began to realize they'd given up on his garden, and his garden was starting to go wild and overgrow. And theirs were all nicely manicured, trimmed, lawns and everything pruned and everything in the right place, and this messy garden. And they gave up on him, and they stopped caring about him. They stopped looking, you know, and Fowles is saying it was then, and the thing is, it still is now. You know, it's sort of the cardinal sin in a neighborhood. I know a few exceptions. I know some friends who live in Oxford where there's a few in the street with kind of little meadow, types growing in the garden. By and large, we still have that attitude of control and dominance over the garden. And no offense to what you're saying about weeding earlier on, you have to get rid of those weeds. But it's what it represents symbolically. Fowles said that as a kid, it was a delight for him because the garden started attracting birds that he'd never seen. He said, I saw my first waxwing thanks to the neighbour's garden becoming overgrown. But he uses this as a starting point for the topic that he wants to talk about, and says, until we live in a world in which we can accept and allow and maybe encourage this idea of letting the garden go back to how nature intended, which means getting more insects into the garden and other wildlife, and allowing greater access, etc. Then we're never going to resolve the issues that we have. And I thought the book is, he writes so well. I'd heartily recommend it.
So, when I came here first, when I met Howard first, this was a field, 0.75 acres of a field. The previous owners had mown the grass to within an inch of its life. They had a ride-on mower. So there were 3 apple trees and 2 tiny little flower beds and covered in greenfly. Now, I have no more room for trees. The only thing that gets mown, it's not mown at the moment, is my labyrinth. So it's a very wild garden. So we have trees.
Did you just say my labyrinth?
My labyrinth. I have a labyrinth, yes. And we planted it for 2000, for the millennium. We had a party for New Year's, and then we thought, okay, we need to have some kind of ritual. This is before I joined the order, and we did it. So you walked into the labyrinth, focusing on what you were leaving behind in the 20th century. Was that the one that we left? Yes. And then you went into the middle, and you focused on where you were going after midnight, and then walk and focus on what you were entering or going into for the 21st century, which was quite beautiful. But the garden is wild, and we don't have any aphids now. Or if they come, if there's aphids, then the wasps will come, or the ants will come, the ladybirds will come. And in a few days, they're clean again. So I've got all sorts of trees coming up themselves, and it's just absolutely, so it's an arc. And when I talk about weeding, I do a little bit of weeding. It's hard to know. I've one little bit so that it allows room for the other plant. But I have to say, when I'm picking weeds, you should leave room for your other plant brothers and sisters. But it's that, and species of birds and insects and all of that we do need that. There's Mary Reynolds. She's I think she won a prize at the Chelsea Gardens. She's an Irish gardener, and I think amazing. And she's gone. She inverted that and created that expression. It's an acronym, ARC, but it means recommending that everybody leave some part of their garden wild and just leave it be, and let's see what emerges, and and the diversity and the health of it. So and our garden is is deliberately wild, and many neighbours have manicured lawns and controlled flower beds. Our garden has dragonflies, masses of bees and butterflies, and we just defend it as needed. I've got bees, and it's just wonderful to and so because of the wildness, then they get enough food. So prefer the forest, says Julian Helms. So turn the front of my house into one. My neighbours really, they like the moss, the ferns and the oaks. Great. So final question, 2 more questions. 1, what gives you hope about the modern world?
Say that again. What
gives you hope?
What do I hope? What gives me hope?
Yeah.
What gives me hope? Oh, people give me hope. People, I absolutely, if you can't pin your hope on people, then what can you pin your hope on? I was greatly inspired in Findhorn by a woman called Julia, who I spent many nights with, staying up very late, drinking coffee and smoking fags, I remember, and then wondering why I couldn't sleep. We had some great conversations. She'd been a politician in London, and she'd kind of semi-retired to Findhorn, and said, I became a politician because I wanted to make a difference, and then I joined a community because I felt like I could really make a difference. And she said to me, and I attribute this quote to her, it might be from somebody else, but she said, there is hope in people, not systems or governments, simply in people. And I just think that is such a great motto to live by, because it's a positive one, and it's one of optimism, and it's an acknowledgement that, you know, with the exception of OBOD, if you know, to put too much hope into a thing, you know, a political way of thinking, a group, whatever, you know, these things come and go, but it has to be in people, and I think my hope is in grassroots organizations, and change coming from the bottom up. Is the people at the top are always the last to know. They're always the last to know. I was so disappointed to hear Keir Starmer saying that, as far as he was concerned, the Labour Party was not interested in changing any of the drug laws in this country. And I see some of the changes that have been happening in places like Portugal, and certainly across parts of America. And by and large, these have been positive, in which we are, you know, we how many trillions have been spent on a drug war that you can never win? How many millions of people are incarcerated because of addiction problems, or because of, you know, petty theft that's happened because of that addiction problem? I know people here in Brighton who have been in prison for many years just for dealing cannabis, you know, and some of the people who were giving it to were people who needed it medically. It's, you know, it's not right. It's very disappointing to hear politicians just having no imagination, you know, or kind of progressive approaches to these things. So I can't pin my hopes on politicians, but I can on everybody else.
The notion of continuing to do that which does not work makes no sense.
Yeah.
Just one question, because it's from Peter. What will Bealtaine mean for you this year? Beltane. Bealtaine.
Yeah, I mean, well, in previous years I've gone to Jack in the Green in Hastings, which is a fantastic experience. So it's a kind of quite a wild anarchic May Day celebration with lots of dressing up.
Oh, wonderful.
I won't be going to that this year because if it is happening, it'll be happening on Zoom. Anne and I have been honouring you know, the equinoxes and these days largely by going for walks in nature and doing little rituals, watching the sunrise, watching the sunset, writing down things that we want to release or you know, welcome into our lives. Very simple things, and I don't feel a great need to do any more than that, as long as I do something. So that will probably be, there'll be some little rituals at home, and I think in nature for that. But I haven't read up on Beltane yet, so I'm working my way through all the millions of booklets that I've got. So I haven't actually read up on it. So I'm sure there are particular things that maybe I should do. Can you suggest what we ought to do on that?
Because again, we're still in lockdown. The Order is going to have their online ritual at 7 p.m. Universal Time on the Saturday, the 1st of May. So that's one thing. So we used to light 2 fires, and it was always a wonderful time. But I'll be out there just looking at nature as well. So
does fire leaping take place?
Well, I never did that. Well, because we 2 fires, we go through the fire between the two. For the summer solstice, we do the fire leaping. But I know there are traditions where you can do it at either time. But just we've always done so we've 2 fires for Bealtaine and one for the solstice and jump then. But I suppose it's really appreciating the abundance in the landscape and that explosion of fertility and growth, and everything's green and wild, and enjoying that. So the Southern Hemisphere will be celebrating Samhain, and so we'll be celebrating Bealtaine, and then I'll be also with the Fellowship of Isis. We also have an online ceremony as well. So being very holy. And then my own Grove on the Sunday, we'll have an online one as well. So
I tell you what, I've done a lot on this day over the years, and that is, we haven't really talked about this, but one of the
you have to come back again.
But I do. I'm half of a live performance called Sing Along a Wicker Man, which is a self-explanatory theatre or cinema experience. Myself and friend Eliza. I'm Lord Summerisle, and she plays Willow McGregor. We lead the audience. We teach the audience some of the songs and the actions from like the Maypole dance. And tell a few stories, and we give the audience goodie bags with edible foreskins and edible umbilical cords and other silly things in it. And we lead the audience through the film and hold up boards with daft instructions on. So I've done that a lot. I mean, you know, Sing Along Wicker Man's been all over. It's been to Ireland as well. We've taught it all over the UK over the last 10 years, and for a while we did it with Robin Hardy, who was the director, he directed the film back in 1973.
Wow!
So he came and joined us.
I'd love to do that someday.
Well, maybe it would be a nice thing. It would be a nice thing to do for an OBOD gathering, because I think.
How long does it last?
How long? It's 2 hours minimum. It's the film is. Is that okay? The film's an hour and 40 minutes, and it takes us 20 minutes to kind of get things rolling at the beginning and kind of explain things. But it's we're doing it for. So I've seen that film about at least 100 times.
You mentioned that, and I wondered, why did you see it so many times? I know. Well, we're going to throw that into the cauldron, David. You've actually broken the record. This has been the longest Fireside Chat. So
is that good? We haven't bored everybody. I haven't bored everybody.
Well, people are still here. It's been just a joy talking to you, and
to you. I feel a bit of an imposter being here, because I'm only 6 months really into the training, into the work, into the reading, into the rituals. But I'm certainly looking forward to many years of joy and participation with OBOD.
Well, you see, my guess, it's not about how druidic you are, how long you've been at it. It's how we engage, and like it's ordinary members, and I haven't spoken to an ordinary one really. Everybody's been absolutely extraordinary. Sure. And by the way, I did watch that extraordinary film last night.
Oh, did you enjoy it?
I did, yes. So anyway, it's been an absolute joy, David. So thank you so much. So don't go away. I'm just going to say goodbye to people here, so I'm going to shut you off for a second. Thank you, all of you, so much for your comments. I know I didn't get to, there were some very, very long ones. I didn't get to read them all, but it's just been such a joy listening to, or reading your comments, having you part of the conversation. And I look forward to seeing you next week for another Fireside Chat. So until then, slán go fóill, ihawa.